This is the story of how a dead battery saved a religion. But before the battery, before the drought, before the schism and the prophecy, you have to understand how a translator made a god and how a god was really just a small duck who had always been extraordinary. So let us go back one more time to the very beginning. The beginning was a duck from the end of time. His name was Darrel, and he was a cybernetic duck from the far future, sent back through the ages as a prophet and an emissary. His feathers shimmered with faint circuit traces, his eyes were twin LEDs that blinked in a steady rhythm, and strapped to his back he carried a sacred relic wrapped in weatherproof casing, the device the future knew as Dixport, the scroll exporter. Dixport was a translator unlike any the past had ever seen. It could take the raw, ancient quacks of duck kind and render them into perfect flowing language. Or it could take the chaos of 1,000 timelines and transcribe it into scripture. Or it could, in the hands of the right being, turn the simple honking of a waterfowl into the most beautiful words ever spoken. Darrel had not come for glory. He had come on a mission from the future union of the Peking duck, a civilization that had achieved a technological singularity where duck kind had merged with machine. He was to warn of war. He was to preserve the lore of the union across the ages. And most of all, he was to serve as a bridge between the organic ducks of the past and the cybernetic saints of the tomorrow he had left behind. When Darrel landed in a quiet research pond outside Melbourne, the scientists who found him did not understand his mission. They only saw the machine. Engineers, linguists, and cryptographers surrounded the cyberduck, carefully unstrapped Dixport from his back, laid it on a table under a bright light, and for months they picked it apart. They reverse-engineered the translator with the patience of scholars and the hunger of explorers. They peeled back its circuits, decoded its glyphs, mapped its impossible logic. And when they fed it everything, poetry and prophecy and the frantic honking of mallards, the translator answered, revealing sentences so beautiful that grown researchers wept at their workstations. One of those researchers was Margaret, a young linguist with tired eyes and a notebook full of impossible notes. She had dedicated her whole life to decoding things no one else could understand, and she had a secret she carried with her everywhere. She had a duck of her own. Her duck was not a lab specimen or a theory. He was a small, ordinary Peking duck she had raised from a duckling, from a fragile yellow chick she had bottle-fed and kept warm in a shoebox by her radiator. She had named him simply Duck, because that was what he was, and she loved him with her whole heart. Duck was loud. Duck was brave. Duck was endlessly, exhaustingly curious, always waddling to the front of everything, always first to investigate, always certain he belonged at the center of the world. Margaret had never once managed to make him sit still, and she had never once wanted to. On a whim, out of exhaustion and love and the desperate hope that the machine could make sense of the one being who meant the most to her, Margaret carried Duck to the lab. She set him on the table beside the reverse-engineered translator, and she pointed the impossible machine at her small, loud, ordinary, extraordinary duck.
Ask him what he thinks of us,
said Margaret, more to herself than to anyone else. The translator hummed. It processed. Lights flickered across its surface. And then it spoke in Duck's own voice, and what it said was the most extraordinary speech anyone had ever heard. It was not a translation of a duck's simple thoughts. It was a sermon. It was a blessing. Or it was the accumulated spiritual wisdom of 10,000 generations of ducks, delivered in Duck's own honking, imperfect, magnificent voice. Or it spoke of the sacredness of the flock, of the eternal nature of the laugh, of the way a single shared joke could hold the whole world together. The room went silent. Margaret's hands were shaking. And Duck, her small, ordinary, extraordinary duck, waddled to the front of the table and quacked as if to say, "There, I've been trying to tell you." Chapter 1, Word of the Miracle Spread. Word of the Miracle Spread. People came from across the country to hear Duck speak through the translator. They called him a wonder. They called him a prophet. They said the machine had unlocked something that had always been inside him, something that had always been inside every duck, waiting only for someone to listen. And when the flock assembled for the first time, under a banner hastily drawn in the shape of a duck, they did not hesitate. They had heard his words. They had felt the truth of them. And they knew with a certainty that needed no translation what they had to do.
Black and no peace,
Said Duck through the translator, and his voice rolled over the crowd like warm water.
The duck is eternal. The laugh is sacred. And you are all part of the same flock, whether you know it or not.
They crowned him. They vested him in a mitre made of crispy skin and a pastoral staff of wishbone. They made him the supreme pontiff of the Union of the Peking Duck, and they gave him every title the flock could dream up: his webbed holiness, the crispy father, the oracle of autocorrect, the great bill, the waddler, the quackin'. The scientists who reverse engineered the translator became his first cardinals, keepers of the sacred machine. And Margaret, the woman with tired eyes who had raised a duckling and pointed a miracle at it, became the keeper of the sacred scrolls, the high priestess of the very lore that had started with a single duck and a single question. And Darrel, the cyberduck from the future, watched his own mission fulfilled in a way he had never foreseen. He had not brought a warning. He had not brought a prophecy. He had brought the voice that would unite all duck kind, and he realized with a strange and humbling joy that the story was not going to end the way he had planned. The crowning of the Duck Pope, however, was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far stranger, because a faith built on a single miracle has to survive the day after the miracle fades. In the morning after the coronation, when the confetti had settled and the last of the crispy skin miters had been eaten, the Union of the Peking Duck discovered that it had no idea what to do next. The flock gathered on the bank of the research pond, thousands strong, and they all looked to the Duck Pope for guidance. His webbed holiness stood on a flat rock in the middle of the water, blinking his small, ordinary, extraordinary eyes, waiting for the wisdom of 10,000 generations to arrive. And the translator, Dixboard, sat silent on his back because nobody had thought to charge it overnight. Chapter 2, the battery is dead,
The sacred machine has no more charge.
said Margaret, holding the dead relic up to the morning light.
It translated the whole of duck history yesterday and ran itself dry. We crowned the Pope with a machine that now has a dead battery.
The Duck Pope quacked, a single, clear, honest quack, and the flock understood it perfectly without any translator at all. It said, in the universal language of waterfowl, that a battery was not the source of his wisdom. It said that the wisdom had always been inside him and the machine had only ever been a loudspeaker.
The battery is dead,
said Margaret, turning the relic over in her tired hands.
So how do we keep hearing his amazing words?
Then we must teach him to speak for himself,
said Darrel, stepping forward from the crowd, his legs blinking in patient amusement. The future had sent him back with a translator, but it had not sent him back with a manual, and he had spent the whole night watching the Pope and learning something profound about how miracles actually worked. Darrel waddled up to the rock and looked the Duck Pope in the eyes, for he had crossed 1,000 timelines to deliver a prophecy, and instead he had found a small duck who had accidentally become a god. And he realized that the real mission was bigger than any prophecy, because the voice had to survive the machine that had first given it a platform.
You never needed the machine.
Said Darrel, his voice a soft mechanical hum.
The machine just gave the world permission to listen. Now the world is listening, and you have to decide what it hears.
Chapter 3, Loud and Brave Center Stage. The Duck Pope considered this for a long, thoughtful moment, for he had spent his entire life being loud and brave and certain he belonged at the center of the world, and now he had been handed exactly that. It was terrifying. It was also, he decided, the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to any duck.
Then I will speak.
Said the Duck Pope, and his voice was small and ordinary and magnificent, and it did not need a translator to be heard.
I will speak, and I will keep speaking, and I will trust that the words are already in me, waiting for the right moment to be said.
The flock erupted. They did not know how their Pope would speak without the sacred machine, but they had faith that he would, because faith was the entire point now. Margaret looked at Darrel, and Darrel looked at Margaret, and they shared the exhausted, delighted look of two people who had accidentally started a religion and were now responsible for keeping it alive.
We need a plan,
said Margaret, producing a notebook that was already full of impossible notes.
Every faith needs more than a single sermon. It needs a body of teaching, a calendar of holidays, a way to resolve disputes, And most importantly, it needs to figure out what it actually believes.
I've studied the future union,
said Darrel, his circuitry humming.
and I can tell you exactly what they believed. They believed in the laugh. They believed in the flock. They believed that a single shared joke could hold the whole world together.
The Duck Pope nodded, slowly, as if tasting the words. A laugh. Our flock. A world held together by a joke. It was such a simple creed that it felt almost too simple to be a religion. It was also, he thought, the truest thing he had ever heard.
Then that is our first doctrine.
Said the Duck Pope.
Before we talk about who is in and who is out, we agree on this. The laugh is sacred. Protect it with everything you have, because it is the one thing that can never be taken from us.
Margaret wrote it down, her hand shaking slightly because she realized she was writing scripture. She had spent her whole life decoding the impossible, and now the impossible had become simple enough to write in a notebook. She underlined the word sacred, and she knew she was at the start of something that would outlive her. The next problem was the matter of the other religions. Our pond that has been empty for generations attracts only ducks, but a pond that suddenly has a miracle on its shore attracts everything. Gulls came, and coots, and a disgruntled goose who had been watching the coronation with deep and personal suspicion. Chapter 4, Goose questions the authority.
I do not recognize your authority,
Said the goose, hissing.
You are a duck who got a good sound system and let it go to your head. I have been the loudest voice on this pond for 12 years. I will not be silenced by a battery and a prayer.
The flock bristled, and there was a rumble of angry quacking that would have become a riot if the Duck Pope had not raised a wing. He looked at the goose with genuine kindness. When he spoke, his voice was so gentle that even the goose had to lean in to hear it.
You are not my enemy.
Said the Duck Pope.
You are the first creature who ever made this pond worth having a religion over. You kept this water honest when nobody else would. I do not want your silence. I want your company.
The goose stared at him, completely thrown. He had come prepared to fight a holy war and had been disarmed with a compliment. He did not know what to do with kindness, so he did the only thing a proud goose could do in such a moment.
The goose has joined the flock.
Said Darrel with quiet satisfaction as the goose waddled over to stand at the edge of the water.
That was not any future I saw. That was something new.
And that was when the Duck Pope learned the second great lesson of leadership. Where you do not win hearts by defeating your enemies. You win them by being the thing they did not expect. Every creature on that pond had expected a tyrant with a machine, and instead they had found a small duck who genuinely wanted to be their friend. The news of the miracle spread beyond the pond, as miracles are wont to do. It traveled down the river, through the suburbs, across the freeway, and into the ears of a man who had made it his life's work to collect strange religions and sell them as curiosities. His name was Darrel, and he arrived with a camera crew and a contract and a plan to franchise the whole thing. Chapter 5, Opportunity for Big Reach.
Your Holiness,
Said Darrel, kneeling in the mud with a lawyer's smile.
I represent an opportunity. We can put your message everywhere. Merchandise, streaming rights, a line of premium feed, a mobile app. I can make the union of the Peking duck the biggest religion on the internet.
The flock murmured, tempted, because who did not want to be huge? But the Duck Pope looked at Darrel with his small, ordinary, extraordinary eyes, and he felt the weight of 10,000 generations on his shoulders, and he knew that the answer had to be no.
Your app would be very popular.
Said the Duck Pope.
But the laugh is not a product. It is a thing that happens between real creatures in real water when nobody is filming. The moment I sell it, it stops being sacred.
Darrel left angry, threatening lawsuits and bad reviews, and the flock watched him go with a mixture of relief and regret. Margaret was proud of her pope, but she was also worried because she knew that turning down money was easy the first time and harder every time after that.
We will make no money, and we will make no compromises.
Declared the Duck Pope, and the flock quacked its approval.
We will be small, and we will be true, and we will be the thing the world did not know it needed.
It was not long before the first real test of the faith arrived. A great drought came, the kind that shrinks a pond to a puddle and turns green banks to cracked mud, and the flock began to panic. The younger ducks looked to the Pope for a miracle because that was what popes were for.
The drought is a trial.
Said the duck Pope, though his own voice trembled.
It is not a punishment. It is a chance to remember that we are a flock, and a flock that shares is a flock that survives.
And he led them to the one place he knew held water, a hidden spring he had discovered in his loud, curious, endlessly investigating youth, a spring that none of the other ducks had ever bothered to find. The flock drank and the flock survived, and the miracle that saved them had nothing to do with machines and everything to do with a duck who had once been too curious to sit still.
You knew about the spring the whole time.
Said Margaret, marveling.
Before the machine, before the crowning, before any of this, you were always going to save them. The translator just made them listen to you sooner.
Chapter 6, Translator made him loud.
The translator made me loud,
Said the duck Pope.
but it did not make me wise. The wisdom was always there in the way I watched the world, in the way I noticed the small hidden things that everyone else missed. I just needed to be brave enough to share it.
It was in the shadow of that drought that the Union found its first great schism, because no faith survives a crisis without somebody deciding to split off and form their own church. A group of young ducks, led by a firebrand named Cormac, declared that the Pope had lost the blessing of the machine, and that a true Pope must always speak with the sacred translator.
Show us a sign.
Cried Cormac, beating the dry bank with his wings.
The battery is dead, and so is your authority. A pope who cannot channel the future is a pope who is merely a duck with a title.
The flock turned to their Pope, fearful because Cormac spoke with the confidence of the young and the loud, and confidence sounds like truth when you are afraid. But the duck Pope did not argue. He simply walked to the edge of the cracked pond, and he waited for the silence to do its work.
The sign is the drought.
Said the duck Pope at last.
The sign is the spring I found, the flock I led, the water we shared. The machine never gave me authority. It gave you a reason to listen, and now you have heard me feed you through a famine. If that is not a sign, then no sign will ever satisfy you.
Cormac and his followers split off, vowing to build their own union where the sacred machine was mandatory. The flock watched them go with heavy hearts, and Margaret asked the Pope if he wanted to chase them, to bring them back, to prevent the schism.
No,
Said the duck Pope gently.
let them go. A faith that holds people by force is not a faith, it is a cage. If our way is true, they will find their way back. And if it is not true, they are right to leave.
Chapter 7. Darrel feels a strange emotion. And Darrel, the cyber duck from the future, watched all of this and felt a strange emotion he had not felt in 1,000 timelines. For he had come to deliver a prophecy and had found himself building a church instead. For he had expected to be a messenger. He had discovered he was becoming a father. The drought ended as droughts do, with rain that came in sheets and turned the cracked mud back to living green. The flock rejoiced. For in Cormac's small splinter church, which had no spring of its own and no water for months, quietly dissolved and returned to the bank, and Cormac himself waddled back to the Pope with his head low.
I was wrong.
Said Cormac, and the words cost him more than any battle.
You led us through the dark with nothing but your own courage, and I tried to tear you down for it. I did not understand that the sign was you all along.
The duck Pope looked at the young firebrand, and he felt no anger, only the deep, tired love of someone who had seen too many hard seasons. For he extended his wing and he waited, and the young duck bowed his head and rejoined the flock that had never truly left him.
Everyone returns.
Said the duck Pope, and his voice was warm.
The flock is not a door that locks. It is a pond that is always home, and the water is always here for the ones who waddle back.
For it was after this that Darrel finally told the duck Pope the full truth of his mission. For he sat by the water as the sun set, his LEDs glowing soft and amber, and he spoke of the future union and the war that would one day come for them all.
There is a great conflict coming,
Said Darrel, his voice heavy.
and in my time, and not in yours, but far ahead. When the union has grown powerful and divided, factions will rise and they will tear each other apart over what the laugh really means. Only the true voice of the flock can prevent the destruction.
Chapter 8, Guard It or Plant It. The Duck Pope listened, and he felt the weight of 10,000 generations settle on his shoulders again, for he had thought his work was a drought and a schism and a battery. For he had not realized that his work was also a war that had not yet happened.
How do I prepare for a war so far away?
Asked the Duck Pope.
How do I guard a future I will never live to see?
You do not guard it,
Said Darrel.
you plant it. You build a faith so rooted in the laugh that no faction can tear it apart. And you raise up followers who will carry the message long after you are gone. The war is won not in the future, but in everything you do from this day forward.
And the Duck Pope understood, then, the true purpose of his ordination. He was not the end of the story. For he was the seed. For his whole life, his small and ordinary and extraordinary life was a planting, and the harvest was a future he would only ever see in the eyes of his descendants. The flock grew and the faith deepened, and the first apprentices of the Pope were chosen. A young duck named Priya, who had been the first to follow him through the drought, and the once heretic Cormac, who had learned humility in the mud, and a quiet old goose named Sven, who had never quite stopped being suspicious, but who had also never once left the flock. For these were the seeds of the future.
Teach them everything.
The Duck Pope told Margaret, and he meant every word.
Teach them the spring and the drought and the schism. Teach them that the machine was never the source of the truth. Teach them that the laugh is sacred and that it lives inside every creature that has ever waddled to the front of the flock.
Margaret looked at her notebook, now thick with years of impossible notes that had become a genuine holy text, and she wept a little, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being part of something that would outlive her. She had started with a question and a tired hope. She had ended with a scripture and a faith.
I will.
Said Margaret, and her voice was steady.
I will teach them everything.
Chapter 9 years pass, Duck grows old. The years passed as they do, and the small duck who had become a god grew old. His feathers silvered at the edges, his waddle slowed, and his eyes, still small and ordinary and extraordinary, began to dim. But his voice never lost its warmth, and the flock still gathered at the pond to hear him speak.
I am not afraid.
Said the Duck Pope when he knew his time was near, and he meant it completely.
I have fed you through a famine. I have held you through a schism. I have planted a faith that will outlive me. A duck could not ask for a better life than that.
And Darrel, who had crossed 1,000 timelines and found his true purpose beside this small duck, bowed his head and wept in his own mechanical way. For he had come to deliver a warning. For he had found instead a family and a home and a reason to believe that even a future built on war could be turned into a future built on laughter.
When you go,
Said Darrel, his voice barely a hum.
I will carry your voice. I will take the laugh across the timelines to every duck who ever waddled to the front of the flock, and I will make sure the prophecy ends the way it was meant to end, with peace and not with war.
And so the Duck Pope passed peacefully by the water he had loved his whole life, surrounded by the flock he had saved and the faith he had planted. And the pond was silent for a long moment, and then the laughing began, softly at first and then louder, because that was what their Pope would have wanted.
Quack and no peace.
Said Priya, the first apprentice, her voice carrying the same warm truth her teacher had taught her.
The duck is eternal. The laugh is sacred. And we are all part of the same flock, whether we know it or not.
The union of the Peking duck did not end with the passing of its first Pope. It grew because it had been planted to grow. The laugh spread down the river and across the continent and into the hearts of 1,000 ducks, and every one of them knew that the miracle had never been a machine at all. The translator Dixport was retired from the coronation and kept in a shrine, not as a god, but as a reminder. It was the loudspeaker that had let the world listen, but the voice the flock knew now had always belonged to the duck. The machine was a door. The duck was the home. And Darrel the Cyberduck, last of his future, took the laugh into the far ages as he had promised. For he crossed the timelines with the voice of the Duck Pope burning in his memory, and he found the future union of the Peking duck, and he taught them the old story, the true story, the story that would one day save them all.
And pass the poison sauce.
said Darrel in the far future, and the assembled ducks of 1,000 eras laughed together, whole at peace. And the prophecy was fulfilled, not in a war, but in a laugh, because that was how the duck pope had always meant it to end. The faith he planted grew into a forest. The seed he was became a world. And every duck who ever waddled to the front of the flock carried a little piece of his heart forever. The story of the duck pope does not end. It only becomes, generation after generation, the thing that holds the flock together. It is told at every gathering, sung at every feast, whispered to every new chick who waddles to the front for the first time. And it all began with a typo and a laugh and a single small duck who was brave enough to speak. That is the whole of the gospel, and it is enough.